Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we need to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and more in particular, Rudy Gobert, who was supposed to be a big acquisition this past offseason that pushed the Timberwolves over the top to become championship contenders after having a really promising year last season. However, it's been nothing but a disaster, and last night's loss against the Miami Heat showcased a lot of the issues that he has had on this roster, why many people are calling it one of the worst trades of all time, and maybe the biggest mistake the franchise has ever made. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos, and let's go ahead and talk about the Timberwolves and Rudy Gobert. As I mentioned, last night the Timberwolves lost to the Miami Heat, which isn't too bad on its own. While the Heat aren't a championship contender, they still are a pretty solid squad and very well coached. However, this was a Heat team without Jimmy Butler, their best player, or either of their usual rotational bigs in Dwayne Dedmon and Bam Adebayo. So they were really lacking size, they were lacking their best player. This is a game that the Timberwolves should take advantage of and get a win that could help swing their momentum. Yes, they were without Karl-Anthony Towns and haven't had him for a good bit now, but you've still got D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, and most importantly, Rudy Gobert, who, the Heat, without Bam Adebayo or Dwayne Dedmon, started Nikola Jovic, who is 6'10 and has about 50 pounds less of weight than Gobert does, at the center spot. This is an opportunity for Gobert to go out and feast. So they had a 6'10 skinny guy and a bunch of 6'6 wings trying to stop Rudy Gobert, who is 7 foot, 250 pounds, and they just gave up a ridiculous haul of assets for. This is the perfect chance for him to assert his dominance, just take over the game completely, and ultimately lead the Timberwolves to a win, put them on his back, and say, hey, I know the season hasn't been great, but these are the moments that you traded for me for. And instead, it was a complete disaster. He put up just 10 points and 8 rebounds. He had not a single block, and he was a minus 14 in 31 minutes. It was so bad that he got benched in favor of Naz Reid for basically the entire fourth quarter, and in particular, the last 5-6 minutes of the game, it was all Naz Reid out there. Gobert didn't really touch the court, and that is partially due to Naz Reid just playing really well. He had 21 points and 11 boards and was a plus 13 on the night, but also it was just such a night and day difference between the team with him on the court versus the team with Gobert. With Gobert on the court, the offense was clunky, which is to be a bit expected. He's never been a great offensive player, but even defensively, the Heat were going right at him like he wasn't a multiple-time defensive player of the year. They were like, okay, sure, whatever, we're just going to go ahead straight attack him right into his chest, go around him. They really didn't care that he was down there in the paint, which is very unusual for Gobert, who over the past few years has been one of the best defensive stoppers we've seen basically in the history of the sport. His shot blocking, his presence around the rim, his ability to just alter shots when they go up has been transformative, and it was for the Utah Jazz. But now for the Timberwolves, it hasn't really been there. So sure, you can expect Naz Reid to outperform Gobert offensively. Maybe he is probably a better offensive player. He can stretch the floor, and he's honestly just more aggressive. But Gobert defensively should easily have the upper hand, but it wasn't the case. He was just getting bodied by the Heat's smaller guys to the point where he got benched in a very crucial moment in a game that the Timberwolves really could have used a win in. In fact, according to StatMuse, the Timberwolves this season in games with Gobert have basically the exact same defensive rating as in games without him. It's a 114 when he plays, and it's a 113.8 when he doesn't. That's really concerning. You traded for him to be this transformative generational defensive talent, and he's not doing that. He's not playing offense. It's been a clunky fit between him and Karl-Anthony Towns, and all in all, it has not been a great season so far for the Wolves after making this monumental move. This is compounded by the fact that an article came out today from John Kozinski, I believe that's how his name is pronounced, and he writes for The Athletic, and in particular about the Timberwolves, and he talked a lot about the Rudy Gobert situation. And I wanted to highlight a few things that he mentioned in this article that I thought were very interesting. He began with talking about what the Timberwolves envisioned bringing him in as a defensive partner for Cat in the front court, who's never really been a stopper down low. And he talked about how the Timberwolves were hoping that this would be a big success, but it hasn't really been, and that if things continue the way that they are, the Timberwolves might have to evaluate the fact that this trade was just a massive mistake and a disaster. And he highlighted a couple of things. In particular, Rudy Gobert's stats across the board are down, and his points, his rebounds, that's to be expected. He's playing now alongside Anthony Edwards as well as Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Lo. You would expect that his points and boards would go down quite a bit. However, the big concern is that his field goal percentage is down 4 or 5 points, and his blocks are down from 2.1 last season to now just 1.2, which, doesn't have much to do with the fact that Cat's down low. He doesn't get many blocks, and like I said, Cat hasn't played in a long time. Last night against the Miami Heat, who once again had one guy playing that was about 7 feet tall, he wasn't able to get many stops whatsoever. He wasn't able to block anybody. So that is a big concern for a guy who's supposed to be one of the premier shot blockers in the league. And these stats show a bit of maybe regression coming for Gobert. Sure, maybe it's just a clunky fit, but he's also reached about 30 years old. I believe he is maybe even 31, and he's going to continue to decline, which is a huge concern if you're the Wolves, making it seem like if you don't win a championship soon, which they're not going to do this season, then how long before Gobert is a complete shell of himself? So this brings us to the question, is this all Rudy Gobert's fault? And real quick, I want to say I don't think all of it is his fault, although a good portion is. There are some outside factors, things like Anthony Edwards, who hasn't exactly been phenomenal compared to expectations. He's still having a pretty good year, but many people thought he could jump to all-stardom this season. That was part of why I believed in the Timberwolves, as I thought we were going to see a big Anthony Edwards rise over the course of this year, but that has not been the case. He still has been kind of like a fringe all-star caliber player, not bad by any means, but also not quite the meteoric rise that many people thought. You've also got D'Angelo Russell, who's been a bit hit or miss, Karl Anthony Towns missing a big chunk of time, and Rudy Gobert himself, he didn't ask to be put in this situation, unless maybe he did and I missed something, but I don't think he asked to be the second center on a roster next to Karl Anthony Towns, building this very clunky fit. So all in all, I don't think it's all Rudy Gobert's fault, but a lot of it still is, because we've got issues like Rudy Gobert has never really improved his offensive game. Now, guards have had problems getting him the ball down low. They had over 20 turnovers last night. Some of those came trying to get him some mismatches in the post, but also even when they get him those balls, what is he going to do? He doesn't have much touch around the rim unless he's dunking or laying it in. It's very often going to be a brick off the backboard. He has no touch. He doesn't have a consistent post game, which leads to you not being able to take advantage of these smaller guys that are guarding you. So that's a big issue that he has there. Defensively, he's not quite been as good. And even going back to the whole clunky fit thing, right now Cat is out. He is the lone center playing on the court at most moments. This is his chance to elevate his game and say, hey, look, I finally got this kind of free reign back. I'm going to go ahead and showcase my performance. Hasn't been the case whatsoever. He's still been disappointing. And this is a great time, I think, to bring up exactly what the Timberwolves gave up for Rudy Gobert from the Utah Jazz. All in all, their package consisted of Patrick Beverley, Leandro Balmaro, Jared Vanderbilt, 4 first-round picks, a pick swap, and the draft rights to Walker Kessler, who they had just taken in the first round. This was a lot, regardless or not if you believed in the Rudy Gobert trade and the Timberwolves' performance afterwards. It was immediately clear that this was a ridiculous amount to give up for Gobert. Sure, he's a great player, but 5 first-round picks, basically, a pick swap, basically your entire future, as well as some really critical role players to your success last season, to bring in a guy in Gobert who was going to be your second center. And if it didn't work out, it was going to be one of the worst trades in NBA history. But the Timberwolves brought in a new general manager in Tim Connelly, and he decided, this is the move I want to make. As most new front offices do, they kind of want to make some big splash, and they said, we're going to try and commit to winning, which I can appreciate that the Timberwolves, who have been a historically somewhat irrelevant franchise in terms of playoff success, they said, we're going to go ahead and capitalize on our young talent and try and bring in a next level guy. But why wasn't it like a small forward or like a power forward to put next to Karl Anthony Towns? Why was it a center that then moved Cat to the 4, where he can't really hold his own defensively, and offensively he's great, but it's just clunky. It doesn't really make sense. And Gobert has been kind of clogging up the paint for Anthony Edwards, who's trying to drive and attack the basket like he typically does. It's been a complete mess. And with last night's loss, the Timberwolves are now 16-18 on the season, 2 games below 500, and hovering right around making the play-in tournament. Funnily enough, this is the exact same record they had last year, 34 games in. So nothing has changed basically, and there are 2 ways you can look at this. On the bright side, you're still 16-18, despite Karl Anthony Towns missing a lot of time, and last year you started off that way and ended up making the playoffs as the 7th seed. So there is some precedent for maybe them turning things around. However, on the not so bright side, you traded your entire future for Rudy Gobert, who is supposed to be an all-star, maybe even all NBA caliber player, definitely an all-defensive guy, maybe even a defensive player of the year caliber player. You gave up a bunch of critical role players to your success and like 7 billion first-round picks, and you're at the same spot. You're exactly where you were last season. That is really, really concerning. And even the more not so bright spot, they're below the Utah Jazz, who now own their entire future in the standings. And that's not all just the Timberwolves being bad. That's credit to the Utah Jazz, who led by Lauri Markkanen, and the play of guys like Jared Vanderbilt, Walker Kessler, who have been both really solid this season defensively and given the Jazz a much needed boost on that end. They've just been good, but the Timberwolves as well have been so disappointing that they're below the team that now owns their entire future for basically the next 7 years. But when we look at this thing on the larger scale of the future, it looks way, way worse, because right now in their first season together, Gobert, Cat, Ant, D'Lo, this all looks like a super clunky fit. Gobert seems to be declining, and he's only going to decline more, meaning that this might be your best chance to win a championship unless you make some major moves. Maybe you give up Cat for a different star caliber player that fits better next to Gobert. Maybe Anthony Edwards jumps to superstardom and you can kind of salvage this thing. But right now it feels like there is very few ways for them to make a true path to contention with the way things are going. And that's super concerning in your first season of this group being together, when theoretically he's only going to keep declining. The Timberwolves don't have draft picks to continue to bring in young talent besides Rudy Gobert and this young core that they have. They don't have assets anymore to make big moves to improve things around this current core that they have. It is looking like a complete disaster in the long term. And this is such a shame because they felt like they had so much momentum coming off last year, making the playoffs for the first time in a while, going through the play-in. That video of Patrick Beverley up on the scorer's table, cheering into the crowd, throwing his jersey, crying, celebrating, look, we did it, Minnesota, we brought y'all back to the playoffs. And in their first run series against Memphis, they outplayed them for the most part. They were probably the better team for a majority of the series, but Memphis continued to come back from massive deficits due to partially their playoff experience, and also they just felt like the more mentally focused squad, and Memphis would end up winning it in 6 games, but it was close all throughout. I really feel like if Minnesota makes a few less mental errors, they could be going on to the second round. So there was a ton of momentum. Anthony Edwards felt like he was on a rise to all-stardom very soon. Cat was still really good. D'Lo wasn't great in the playoffs, but had a decent regular season, and maybe you could just upgrade at the point guard spot if you wanted to make a massive move. They had young guys like Jared Vanderbilt, Jade McDaniels, for example. Patrick Beverley seemed to be shifting the culture a bit. They had a pick in Walker Kessler who could come in and bring you maybe some solid backup minutes at the center spot. It felt like things were building towards potentially a successful tenure for this Minnesota Timberwolves core that they had going on. But instead, it's been a year of massive disappointment for Timberwolves fans and believers alike. I believed in this team, and I got bamboozled. I really thought they were going to be a super solid regular season team, maybe be a top 4 seed in the Western Conference, albeit I didn't see them as championship contenders. To me, it felt like that this would be a fun story, and in the regular season, they would be highly successful, but ultimately lose to just some better teams out west. But maybe even then, they could continue to build off it in the future to the point where maybe Minnesota eventually wins a title. Instead, now it feels like they're going to be stuck in purgatory for a while, maybe even over the next 7 years, because they now lack assets to fix this massive mistake that they made. If things don't turn around sooner than later, it will go down as one of the single worst trades in the history of the sport. With all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Make sure you comment down below, what do you think about this Rudy Gobert trade? Do you think that there's any way they turn this thing around, or that it is truly doomed like many people believe? I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.